On December 29th, 2015, I released a video about Amnesia, a machine for pigs. No, not on this channel, on a much more bustling and popular one with 17 subscribers. Yes, you can see the video, but not quite yet. That video was made up entirely of scathing criticism, as was the style at the time, and lasted for a mighty 1 minute and 26 of the longest seconds you'll experience this side of a black hole. In the video, I state with a degree of that classic youthful certainty that the game isn't scary or realistic, and that it paled in comparison to its critically acclaimed predecessor, the genre titan that is Amnesia: The Dark Descent. For these reasons and more, I hated A Machine for Pigs for a very long time, and it makes sense as to why, despite my complete inability to articulate that fact back then. It was a major change from The Dark Descent in terms of not only gameplay and interactivity, but also aesthetics, setting, and even development studio. And personally speaking, it was one of the first games I ever pre-ordered, so whatever disappointment I was going to have was bound to be compounded. But it's been 10 years since then, the 10 most eventful years of my, and likely many of your, lives. My views on basically everything have changed, and I've had the chance to replay A Machine for Pigs many times. So now feels like a poignant time to ask, was I wrong about Amnesia: A Machine for Pigs? Yes, almost entirely, but let's talk about why. The game has us playing as one Oswald Mandis, a prominent London meat processing tycoon in the year 1899, as he navigates a brief but notable encounter with memory loss, as well as some horrific pigmen. And no, London is not the inherent horror here, that's more of an underlying fright. Instead, the game has us slowly unraveling Mandis's tragic, vile past as he navigates an industrial Victorian nightmare world of his own design. His goal, after waking up in a confused haze in his strangely draconian mansion, is to find his twin sons, Edwin and Enoch, who are hiding, or being held, somewhere in the depths of Mandis's very own facility. So, on paper, it's not too dissimilar from Amnesia: The Dark Descent's setup. In that game, you're also an amnesiac man in 1800s Europe delving into a subterranean torture fortress to also find someone with a similarly old, albeit substantially better aged, name. Apologies to any Enochs out there, but I think the Alexes have you outnumbered. So what went wrong? Why did people revere The Dark Descent but denounce A Machine for Pigs? Well, many reasons, unfortunately. Immediately upon starting the game, you can realize how little of the world is actually interactable. Yes, you can manually open and close many, but definitely not all, doors in Mandis's home, with most being mechanically sealed shut or otherwise unusable. And a handful of the props laying around can be picked up and thrown about, but compare this to The Dark Descent, or even Frictional's previous games in the Penumbra series. In those, almost every small to medium-sized object could be picked up and played around with. And sure, that seems like a little bit of a gimmick on paper, but in reality it was a defining part of the gameplay experience. You could stack boxes and chairs to build makeshift ladders or ramps to reach objectives. You could improvise hiding places, you could pile random trash against doors to slow down approaching monsters, and there were specific puzzles which required you to engage with the game's physics engine in ways that mirror or even improve upon the standards set by games like Half-Life 2, among various other uses like throwing shit at scary guys. Plus, it was kind of fun to be able to engage with the world like that even without any pragmatic reasoning. It made the environments feel dynamic and immersive and gave the player a bit of additional agency. But in A Machine for Pigs, almost everything is glued down or otherwise non-interactable. The world is substantially more static. There are some puzzles that require you to, say, carry around a fuse or a fuel can, but those are few and far between. On top of this, A Machine for Pigs has literally no inventory system or resource management. In the others, you'd have to find oil or batteries to fuel a portable light source. You'd need tinder boxes or matches to light candles and torches. You'd have drugs or painkillers to manage your health. You'd carry around puzzle items that you can often combine with others or use multiple times in different scenarios. And in some of these games, you can carry around situational weapons or distractions. And all of these are pretty standard survival horror elements. But none of that exists in A Machine for Pigs. Your health automatically regenerates, your lantern needs no fuel, and all of the puzzles are substantially more restricted. However, the game is not entirely different. As we explore the mansion, we can find a staple of the series, notes and flashbacks that slowly piece together the story in wonderfully unreliable, non-linear ways. Like this one, in which we hear Mandus grieving the loss of his wife who tragically died in childbirth, leaving him to raise 2 sons alone and unprepared. There's also a heavy emphasis on environmental storytelling, which may actually surpass the previous game's efforts, much of which goes completely unspoken, which really adds to the horror of everything going on. For example, the heavy steel cages that are built into the beds in Mandus's home. Initially, we're given no context for them. Are they to keep something out? Keep people locked in? No matter which way you look at it, it's foreboding. Similarly, there are these cramped hidden passages between rooms with one-way mirrors and voyeuristic snapshots of unaware visitors, which, to my knowledge, are never outright explained. They're just ways of showing what kind of man Mandus really is. A goofy prankster who's up to mischief. These have been 2 examples from the very first level of the game, and these kinds of things persist largely throughout the entire experience. So you may get the impression that the main differences between this game and the others in the Amnesia and Penumbra series are purely mechanical, as the stylistic elements seem to be pretty similar. But one of the main strengths of the Dark Descent in particular was the marriage of these 2 sides of the game. A prime example was with its sanity mechanic. If you spent too long looking at things that trouble the game's protagonist, Daniel, you'd lose sanity. Monsters, darkness, corpses, Instagram comment sections, and so on could all contribute to that. And the more sanity you lost, the harder the game would become to play. It would crank up mouse acceleration, images would blur and trail, and the very surroundings would seem to warp and writhe as if the castle itself was alive. Which, to be fair, wasn't out of the question, and that is a perfect combination of mechanics contributing to aesthetic quality. It would also cause things like hallucinations, both audible and visual, with certain events only triggering if Daniel was adequately rattled. And who could forget that horrid sound that played when Daniel was afraid? The grinding of his teeth, sounding a little bit like someone rubbing 2 pennies together. But now compare all of these elements to a Machine for Pigs' darkness. There's no warping, no sanity, no dynamic anxiety or panic element. I mean, Mandus is substantially less frightened than Daniel in general, but you'd think he'd have a bit of a reaction to his surroundings. The full list of Amnesia protagonists from most scared to least scared is as such. Daniel, he's always freaking out. Tassie, she's often freaking out. Mandus largely just wants his kids back and only sometimes gives a shit. Henri, he's initially very scared but then locks in to a generational degree. And finally, Justine. If you know, you know. So again, without the sanity, the game feels a little less dynamic, a bit more stale. And that's a shame, especially considering how much more unsettling the machinery found throughout the Mandus meat processing plant would be if it felt just a little more alive. Now, everything I've said so far is what I would today consider to be a relatively inoffensive and dry critique of the game's often perceived shortcomings. If I released a video with just that stuff, I would be a little disappointed. It would be far from my best efforts, and it would lack much purpose. Do you want to see what I thought was a good effort with plenty of purpose 10 years ago? I don't, but we're going to. Now, I've not recorded this next section yet, but I can safely assume it's going to be a man well past his prime, quite ruthlessly bullying his younger self. So, enjoy. I really don't want to watch this, but I have to. This is how we grow as people. Why is YouTube not registering my dislike of this? There we go. Where to even begin? The thumbnail is a work of art. Slap a slightly reddish pink gradient on the logo of the game, which is slightly off-center, with some default image editor text beneath it. Okay, I won't put it off any longer, let's just watch it. I am going to be pausing it a lot. If you want to watch the video without my interruptions, I will probably link it in the description. But here we go. Oh god.
Amnesia, a Machine for Pigs, is many things.
Good to see I've kept that bit of rhetoric. Good to see there are limits to human growth. Also, nice FPS counter in the corner, dickhead.
Not scary in the slightest. Yep.
Yeah, not scary in the slightest. I say, cleverly believing that every single event and trigger that happens in a horror game has to be the scariest thing to ever exist. That was just an audio trigger. That's not an example of a scare. Yeah, everyone thinks you're really cool and smart, brother. Ignore the fact that the relentless march of time continues, and your attempts at nonchalance will one day leave you jaded and bitter in a world where everyone's making better shit than you.
A poor representation of how physics works?
Oh god, realism is always... It's baby's first critique topic, right? If you don't like something, you just say it's not realistic and you give some random explanation as to why. The second someone starts talking about realism, you either know they have nothing of any actual substance to say, or worse, they have no understanding of artistic license. Also, the physics are not bad in these games. They're like a core part of their identity. They're not hyper-realistic, but like, they're good. They're fine. They're fun. Oh my god, this guy will complain about absolutely anything.
You're damn right.
Ugh, fuck off.
A game with predictable jump scares and an unpredictable frame rate?
Okay, that comment's not terrible, right? There's something there. I mean, it's not good, but the whole predictable jump scares, unpredictable frame rates, 1, 2, it's something. I mean, it has the textbook snark of someone afraid to be genuine, but there was the seed of something there. And it's also a fair point. The game does still run terribly today. I don't know why. It will randomly just cut to 30 FPS for some reason. But, yeah. Let's see what one of these predictable jump scares was. That's what I thought a jump scare was? Oh my god, I was a walking example of the Dunning-Kruger effect and not the, like, good end of it.
Indeed. Full of inexcusably long loading times. That's a heart right there.
Oh, fuck off with your little comment. Don't try and be all, like, buddy-buddy with the viewer. In a couple of years, you're going to realize that your main USP is that you're strange and off-putting. Just bite into that now. Don't try and be like... I can basically hear the smirk in your voice as you're saying that. God, he was a dickhead.
Don't even know what this aspect ratio is. It's like...
It's a square! It's a square! You don't know what aspect ratio that is? It's a square!
3 by 3.5. Yeah, this is normal. It's fine. Don't worry about it.
Alright, this little Vegas scene is fine. It's a funny little meta joke about how the viewer can see how much longer's left in the loading screen. Well done. You know your software well. But that just draws attention to this timeline. What is going on here? Why did you edit together all of the visuals before adding in any audio? Is that why the pacing of this is so terrible? Yes, the answer to that is yes.
You get the idea. A disappointment which pales in comparison to its predecessor, as well as both of the Penumbra games,
Nice little... there. What was that? Sorry, I'm picking apart anything this guy does at this stage.
And Black Plague. It's a shame they never made a third one.
Why are you trying to get the Penumbra Requiem haters on side? You liked Penumbra Requiem. I like Penumbra Requiem. Why are we trying to appeal to some imaginary group? Although I imagine Penumbra Requiem haters do exist. Why am I just being negative for the sake of it? Gee,
Undeniably. But I'll be damned if it isn't the single greatest pool simulator I've ever played.
Oh yeah, there you go. A nice little light-hearted bit at the end to show it wasn't entirely in mean spirit. Fuck off. Get a pop filter, you wretched little prick. Also, calling it a good pool simulator after moments before admonishing the game's physics system is outrageous. Some of you will rightly note that my commentary on the video was substantially longer than the actual topic itself, and yeah, it was, but that's what happens when you actually have something to say and you aren't just making videos because you think you should. The most frustrating part about this video is that it's so not me. I wasn't this snarky or intentionally dismissive back then. It's just that a lot of the creators I liked watching at the time were. The idea of like pointless negativity and oversimplification as vehicles for humor was, and still kind of is, rampant. And, you know, that bled into everything I did, and that's a real shame. Thankfully, shortly after this video came out in December 29th, 2015, I found some channels that would go on to inspire this style of content I make now, and I'm still, frankly, trying to copy those unashamedly. And another thing about this is I hate the way I speak in this.
Amnesia, a machine for pigs.
Amnesia, a machine for pigs. Okay, he didn't sound like that, but I just want to mock him a little bit more. You can tell he grew up in the same part of the world as Sean Connery. Mrs. Moneypenny, Mandus has built a machine for pigs, the madman.
Is many things. Not scary in the slightest.
Oh god, why is it so forced? Why is he trying to sound like an authority on the topic? It might not sound like that to you guys, but that's what he was going for. I would know. It was me. I mean, some of the early videos on this channel also sound really forced, but in like the opposite direction. I try and sound too casual, and you can hear in my voice that I'm very anxious to be speaking into a microphone. That's a tip for anyone who wants to get into video making yourself. Stop trying to sound like something, and you'll sound a lot more like yourself.
You get the idea.
Why did he answer me? Okay. This video's winding me up. You wanna know something crazy about this whole thing? About this whole critique of Amnesia Machine for Pigs? I hadn't finished the game back then, and do you wanna know why? I was scared of it. I was too scared to beat the game. Yeah, I was really into horror media for years before this, but this game still terrified me, despite me calling it not scary in the slightest. Why do you think I showed clips from pretty much exclusively what is the introduction level of the game? There were like 3 other videos I made in a similar vein to this at around the same time. They weren't quite as bad as this, but goddamn. This is why hate comments on my like modern videos don't bother me at all, because if you think what I make now is bad, you haven't seen how genuinely dogshit I can be. So now that we're safely past that and I never have to view it ever again, let's talk about the biggest reason I was wrong about the game. It's not necessarily down to anything I said back then, but rather what I failed to say. Because every single criticism I had, and even have today, are largely inconsequential compared to its biggest strength. The story. Fans of the game will have just collectively cheered, shouted, fist-pumped the air because they've been saying that since it came out, more or less. I'm now gonna do that YouTuber thing that I don't usually endorse where I just summarize the entire plot for you, but I'm also gonna add in some analysis and a fun fact or two, so I hope all can be forgiven. It's December 31st, 1899. New Year's Eve, or as we'd fittingly call it in Scotland, Hogmanay. And speaking of Hogmanay, we awaken Mandus's mansion, which he has clearly been able to afford thanks to all of that hog money. He awakes with no memory of the prior months, with one and only one goal: find his sons and guarantee their safety. And without getting ahead of myself, let's just say, whoops! He stumbles around his home, finding only glimpses and echoes of his children, all while the very foundations of the estate shake ominously. And given that we paved over all of the tectonic plate boundaries beneath Britain to better pedestrianize Norwich city centre, we can tell these are not normal earthquakes. Interestingly, the game does little to get us to empathize with Mandus, even from the get-go, minus the whole single father angle. Like I mentioned earlier, his house is fucking weird. Real H.H. Holmes vibes with strange hidden rooms and cages and voyeurism which doesn't exactly look fresh. We can get the impression that he's been a bit of a menace for quite some time, and not just because of the inherent baggage that comes with being a well-to-do London industrialist in the late 1800s. He clearly did a lot of classic colonial Brit things, too. Traveled the world, killing exotic animals and the like before stuffing them and sticking them in a little miscellaneous side room of his pervert castle. And he also captured one of the spiders from Penumbra. I guess he was that one troop we sent to Greenland. Interestingly, this room has a very unique interaction. We have to move this big grizzly bear to access a secret room, and it's one of the few examples of physics interactions you have beyond opening and closing doors. Weirdly, another one of the only items with pretty consistent interactability are chairs. Many chairs of different sizes and forms are able to be picked up and thrown around throughout the whole game, which may imply that one of the rare exotic animals he has killed was an Arctic monkey. This gives us one of the first glimpses past the facades of wealth and comfort into Mandus's true home. A bunch of pipes with gizmos and jets of steam shooting out of them. A kind of visual that either represents goofy cartoon inventors or a kind of torture labyrinth. Jury's out. Around this time, Mandus receives a phone call from an anonymous ally who we'll call the Engineer. The Engineer tells us that our children are trapped far below us amidst the guts of the great and vague machine, which itself is falling apart and requires Mandus's immediate aid. Save the machine, save your children. That is our goal. So we leave the mansion and head outside, which itself is a little odd. Both the Dark Descent and the Penumbra games rarely had you going outside, and when they did, it was for very brief linear sections, which is also what happens here, to be fair, but it's substantially more detailed and, most notably, urban, as opposed to Brennenberg's suburban nature and Inner Greenland's suburban nature. Despite taking place in one of Europe's most busy cities, these London streets are entirely empty, eerily so. This is perhaps one area where the static visuals of the game actually aid it, but I can't earnestly say that would have been intentional. It is weird roaming these outdoor areas, especially if you have the game's, frankly, obtuse color grading setting on, which I forgot to disable for the first few levels, and I apologize for that. And the barren nature of the city isn't accidental. Most of the streets we see are, I believe, on Mandus's very own land. That's not to say it's uninhabited, or at least it hasn't always been. The church we enter here is one of my favorite parts of the game for both narrative reasons and aesthetic ones. As a set piece, it is extremely powerful. Not only are the mood and soundtrack absolutely on point, but the closer you look, the more unsettling it becomes. The slaughtered pigs upon the altar are the most notable, but if you look to the stained glass behind them, you will find no saint, only a pig and machinery. And the purpose of the church is extremely distressing. Mandus himself had it built as an act of charity, a place to gather the poor and provide warmth and sustenance in what was, infamously, quite an unforgiving time. So the people flocked to him, and they viewed Mandus as kind. The following passage is found in a note in the church's basement. What exhumation is this? What rotten fruit? What bestitching of parts? I doubt I will ever be found, yet I leave you this, scrawled in the malodorous half-light whilst my tormentor shuffles below. My fellow prisoners keen and squeal in the gloam, and where I wait for the knocking upon my cage that signifies it is, finally, my turn to make that dark journey into the interior. Cages litter the basement, all now empty. Those who once inhabited them, the needy, the desperate, those who viewed Mandus as a savior, dragged into the depths of his factory, which, need I remind you, is a meat processing plant. You might get some idea of what's happening here, but let me tell you, the reality is way worse. The game is full of notes like that, and the writing is simply sublime. Whoever was in charge of that really nailed the reserved yet disgusting industrial gore feeling they were going for. Hell, even the game's name is vile. A machine for pigs? I genuinely don't know if there's a more unpleasant series of words that says so much without being fully graphic. That being said, some of the notes in the game are a little on the graphic side, like this one from a little bit later on. Inflamed it is, burning it does, bleeding from each hole fore and aft, leaking down my legs, blood and excrement. My lungs are in my vomit, I pass clots of my organs now onto the filthy stone. Drink this, he says, and I did drink it. I did do that. Because of the changes, they ripple inner me. My teeth sneeze out and scatter like mice in the dark. I cannot find them all. Gathered what I can and pushed them back into my grey gums with my fingers, but the nails are all weepy and falling out. Etc. You can read the rest. The church is one of the earliest hints at what the mysterious machine truly is. The images on the stained glass alone would be enough, but another note found shortly prior explains it entirely. Imagine, they say, a machine one day that might think like a man, as if this is to be desired. One might almost boast of creating a man who breeds like a pig, men and women on all fours, rutting carelessly, ejaculating their filthy little missives into the streets. alleys and gutters running freely with the careless spill of their conjoinings. The air thick with the whimperings of lust, bodies streaked with their own emissions. We have created a world where man is so utterly debased he will spray his seed over passers-by. And yet, this is the condition Babbage aspired to. No, this is not the machine we seek. Such an entity should be nothing less than a deity, and we would fall upon our knees and worship it. We shall not carve gods to bicker and fornicate. They will exist to clean the world and set us free. I reject Babbage as I reject these men of government. Let the pigs copulate in the gutters whilst they can. We shall scoop them up and ease their ascension soon enough. Mandus did not build a simple machine. He built a god. One that would cleanse the earth of flesh. Assuming it doesn't violate OpenAI's content moderation guidelines. It's interesting to note his clear hatred of humans breeding. Why would he feel that way if he now wants nothing more than for his own children to be safe? And also note his disdain for the men of government. Maybe it's something to do with this device I found that says Pigs Gauge EU 895. Is this why they voted to leave the Union? Was Brussels trying to regulate our hubris engines? Everything I've covered so far, by the way, occurs before the first real enemy encounter. This is a very story-dense game, with much of it being very easily missed if you don't care much for note-based storytelling. The enemy encounters, the first of which happens amidst the people cages below the church, are largely forgettable. Not because the enemies themselves are bad, the designs of the pigmen are horrific. They're part man and part something else entirely. I remember being mortified of them when I first encountered them 12 years ago. Not only are they well designed, but I also really don't like pigs. That's not like a sly political jab or anything, I'm genuinely talking about the animals. They freak me out. I have my reasons, don't ask. And basically every enemy encounter is your standard horror game rudimentary stealth fare. Sit in a dark corner until they pass you and then you creep on by. It's a simple formula that you've seen in 1,000 games. That's not to say it isn't tense. I still get the heebies and occasional jeebies when I turn a corner and meet a pigman unexpectedly, but I won't be talking at length about these sections because there's little reason to. Moving on, we reach the meat processing plant proper, and for the next while, the main draw here is the beginning of the real descent into the machinery. I won't go over every story beat, so the general gist is Mandus looks for his kids, can't find them, and then the engineer calls him and says something along the lines of,
Mandus, are you familiar with WD-40? I hope so, if you value our lives.
Between these moments are more pigman encounters, with each growing slightly more distressing. And you may have been able to figure out by this stage, both in the game and in this video, that the pigmen are Mandus's own creation. Using the pre-existing infrastructure of mechanized butchery, Mandus captured dozens, maybe hundreds of people and mutilated them into becoming his slaves. He spliced their human forms with the domesticated flesh of livestock to create a strong, vile, and obedient army. The full process of their transformation is unclear, but we do get snippets here and there, just enough to make it utterly horrifying. We're told that the subjects are lobotomized before their full transformation, so they're less distressed when they awake as these new monstrosities. That, alongside the horrific mechanical imagery, makes the man-pigs very reminiscent of the Cybermen from Doctor Who for any fellow losers out there. In fact, it's unclear why the pigs were necessary at all in this process. If the mentally dominated servants were all Mandus wanted, he could have simply followed Alexander of Brennenburg's example from Amnesia: The Dark Descent. He also mutilated people into awful flesh atronachs, but he didn't need any farmyard friends in the process. It seems that Mandus's use of pigs was largely symbolic. He viewed humanity as little more than livestock, which we'll elaborate on later. But while I'm mentioning The Dark Descent, A Machine for Pigs actually directly addresses its events. There's a note that references what is likely one of the grunts or brutes from The Dark Descent, with Mandus having inherited or otherwise found some remnants of the incident at Brennenburg thanks to his great uncle. Now, I don't know if Daniel from the first game had many siblings, but the one we know about is Hazel, his younger sister, who he deeply cared for. She's described as being extremely, basically fatally unwell prior to the events of The Dark Descent, but perhaps she got better, which would be a surprisingly nice turn of events, if, you know, her grandchildren didn't turn out to be horrific villains. So it's either implying that Daniel was Mandus's great uncle, or it's implying that Alexander of Brennenburg, the creepy ageless alien, was. I don't know which is more likely. Given that Mandus does not speak kindly of Prussians, and that Daniel was also from London, I'd guess it's not Alexander's unknown sibling that Mandus is descended from. That being said, there are Prussian flags in the church area, so who knows. In order to achieve the pigman transformations, Mandus actually used some of the technology or alchemy know-how from Brennenburg. Intersecting the mysticism of the past with the industry of the present led to some interesting end products, like reality-shifting lightning pigs. The modern-day equivalent to that would be those TikToks where people ask you to leave a comment to claim positive energy. All this being said, the machinery in Mandus's plant does not exclusively create the pigmen, that's just a side hustle. The bulk of the infrastructure suggests it's still mainly meat processing. But now that there's both pig and human being fed into that, what do you think the results were? What do you think Mandus was selling to the public? You know, it's called Long Pig for a reason. I can't find any concrete proof that Mandus was selling human meat, but it's heavily implied that he was. He often writes in grand metaphors in his journals, but some entries are definitely more literal than others. No machine blades for fatty bishop and gluttony heiress. Prime cuts all for the sorting bins, and the very best, as always, back in a dumbwaiter to the kitchens above, to be stewed and plumped and gravied and breadcrumbed and returned to the table for the next night's feast. And not every night, you see, although we have begun to increase the frequency of the final act. Unlike the poor, the rich will be missed, given time, but we continue to spoil and ready them, and our fine foods are now exported to mansions and lodges across London. And it has been noted in the times of late how rather overweight the great and the good are becoming with their diets of fine wine and rich meat. Indeed, in Punch, just last week, a cartoon showed Viscount Selwyn as a stuffed pig, laid upon a platter for his peers to dine upon. A vicious and cowardly slander, no doubt, but he tasted delicious. This makes me feel pretty sick reading it, sicker writing about it, and potentially sickest recording it. We'll see. No, it was actually fine, I think. But this note also adds to the ever-growing image of Mandus's ideology. Not only does he use the poor and misfortunate as livestock, but he also hates the rich. When I first looked into the character, I assumed he was the classic raging capitalist type who wanted to accumulate wealth or power at the cost of the common man, but that's only partially true. He despises the wealthy, the poor, and we've already established that he has little time for the government or the church. There are also scholarly characters he doesn't tolerate, and he speaks of the British Empire as being ripe for the bleeding. Hell, he doesn't even like Prussians, he simply hates humanity. Except, of course, for his wife and kids. But why? We'll get to that in a little bit. Despite the environments lacking the aesthetic signs of life that you'd find in The Dark Descent, Mandus's factory does actually achieve something similar by different means. The game makes a very concerted effort to label the different parts of the facility as body parts, organs in a vast mechanical beast. The pipes and tunnels as veins and arteries, the abattoir all the way down to the sewers as its digestive tract, and the I don't want to keep talking about this metaphor because it's fucking gross, but you get the point. I do wish it had the writhing distortions of Brennenburg, but it does do some other stuff which is very interesting in itself. Like this. In all the years I've played this game, I haven't noticed one very key detail. Some rooms move around sometimes, silently, while you're not looking. It's actually horrifying to think about. Look at this. I walk into this cold storage area, flip a switch, and when I walk out, the environment has shifted entirely. A new hallway, a new way out, longer and more winding than before. Then, when you're done, it reverts to normal completely seamlessly. Now that's very normal in contemporary horror thanks to the likes of Bloober Team and the mad influx of psychological horror in the mid to late 2010s that love to do the whole turn around and the door has vanished or whatever trope, but this predates almost all of that. Plus, this game does it so subtly. It draws no attention to it. Whether this is a hallucination on Mandus's part, which I wouldn't rule out, or not, doesn't really matter, because it adds to the illusion that the factory itself is alive. Sentient, even. I didn't notice any other examples of this happening, but again, it's so subtle I absolutely could have missed them. There's a great story by the narrator Asaphale horror fiction called Mastication that this reminds me of. It's a very good story, I'll link it in the description. Another thing that makes the plant seem sinister in itself is that it will occasionally throw words like sluice and bilge at you. I don't like those words, especially in the context of a stagnant, putrid sewer full of carcasses. And this sewer section leads into one of the most affecting parts of the game, a reflection of Mandus's whole worldview. We get to see where the man-pigs live. They live brutally, clearly having a hierarchy as the larger specimens beat the lesser ones into submission. They gather and feast at a grand old table, devouring nondescript flesh scraps and human corpses amidst the backdrop of opera music. All of this happening mere meters away from the fetid sewers. The animalistic vulgarity of it all, coupled with this ironic facade of opulence and class in the form of the music and furniture, mirrors Mandus's outlook perfectly. The short section that follows is equally affecting. That understated opera music continues as you inspect the living conditions of the lower caste of pigmen. You peek into their rooms, seeing them sleep, struggle, or even attempt to play with children's toys. That last act in particular is deeply upsetting. Knowing that these aren't simply mindless slaves makes them all the more tragic. And I don't know what's more troubling, the idea of the pigman attempting to play being a vestigial element of who it was before, or simply an innate animal desire. Notably, there are no jump scares in this part. You might expect these little windows and viewports to provide an opportunity for scares, but the game holds back. What it shows is far worse than any immediate shock. Granted, not all elements of the factory are as harrowing or gross. There are these little airlock devices that are placed around the game, which I'm pretty sure are there to act as little loading zones, and they feel a bit less sinister than Mandus's other creations. They're a bit Wallace and Gromit. A few times in the game you have to crawl through some claustrophobic pipes, which reminded me of two things. One was the sewer planet from Ratchet & Clank 3, which is a bit more niche than the other thing it reminded me of, the Lanedell Underground from Elden Ring. In fact, a lot of this game reminds me of the Lanedell Underground and its inhabitants. The vibe of vile sewer living is rampant in both, and for those aware of Elden Ring lore, Mandus isn't that far off from the loathsome Dung Eater in terms of actions. Their philosophies differ, but their effects aren't that far apart. I'd argue that Mandus is far worse. He's a little more like Shabriri in many ways, but that's a topic for another day. That Elden Ring video should be out by at least 2035. Now, I'll stop delaying any further and tell you what's really going on with our man Mandus, much of which is revealed to us upon reaching the core of the facility. It's a beautiful set piece. You're alone in an elevator as the music swells, showing labyrinthine pipes that lead to an enormous machine suspended above an opposing pit. And naturally, the controls for that machine are in a TIE fighter, and this is when we learn the true nature of the engineer, that voice that has been guiding us along the way. He is no man. He is the machine itself. Mandus's rage at the world made manifest. And it should be no surprise that his promises of reuniting Mandus with his children were hollow. He just needed Mandus to fix various technical issues and would promise him anything he could to achieve that end. And now that he's fully functional, he can begin to cleanse the world, unleashing the pigmen onto an unsuspecting London, feeding more meat into himself to create a self-sustaining army that feasts on its own discarded flesh. But why? What could possibly have made Mandus, and by extension this grim reflection of him, so spiteful? Let's talk about orbs. The orbs are a major plot device in the series, being directly mentioned or used in The Dark Descent, A Machine for Pigs, and Rebirth. Sort of in Justine as well. Henri had other shit to worry about in the bunker, I guess. They're largely mysterious in origin and function. They were worshipped or otherwise revered by many largely extinct cultures, notably the ancient Egyptians, as well as being deeply involved with the religion of Mithraism. Or Mithraism, I'm not certain. What do the orbs do? Magic stuff, I guess. Portals and the like. And Mandus, alongside his two sons on a trip to Mexico, found one of these orbs in an Aztec temple. It showed him visions of the future, the imminent 20th century, and what he saw was enough to break him. Wars, genocide, oppression, unprecedented and incalculable suffering. And worst of all for him personally, he saw a vision of his two sons, Edwin and Enoch, massacred in the Battle of the Somme, one of World War I's most devastating and violent chapters. To give you an idea of how rough it was, there's still, over 100 years later, parts of France and Belgium too rife with unexploded ordnance or too contaminated with chemical weapons to safely occupy. That is what he saw. He saw that the coming century would be hell. To save his boys from that fate, Mandus himself murdered them. He saw it better for them to die swiftly at the hands of their father with their innocence intact than to drown in mud and shrapnel as pawns in the game of empires. He thought he was saving them. Overcome with grief, guilt, rage, and the burden of things to come, he went home and got to work, building a machine that would stop all of the atrocities of the future by eliminating their cause. He brought the orb with him. It's suggested that the orb is connected to the creation of the engineer as a distinct entity, but that's both unclear and irrelevant. The orbs don't control people like that. This was all Mandus. The game's wiki and various discussions surrounding the story frame Mandus and the engineer as a sort of good and bad side of the same man, but I think that's doing the plot a disservice. The two worked together. Mandus still wrote all of those horrific notes, executed these terrible acts, carried these awful beliefs. The engineer is just more of that. More concentrated, sure, but not wholly separate. Now, back to the present, the machine is fully operational. It has no more use for its flesh counterpart, which leads us into the final stretch of the game. Rising from the depths of the machine, we find ourselves on the streets of London once more, and this section is one of the best narrative sequences in any game I've played. Mandus is forced to witness his plan come to fruition. The man-pigs hunt civilians, chasing, kidnapping, and massacring them as they go. We, the player, and Mandus, can only watch. The machine taunts us throughout this section, reveling in the violence and supposed cleansing to come.
Mandus, I know you are out here. I own this city. I am this city.
No! This is not what I meant! This is not what I meant at all!
But the truth is, this is what he meant. This is what he wanted. And this is one of the most poignant and distressing moments in the whole game because it reflects such a horribly real pattern in the world. Whenever there's an atrocity committed, those responsible, those who designed it, proposed it, lobbied for it, voted for it, and even those who simply stood by and watched, become very quiet as soon as they're stopped, exposed, or faced with the reality of what they have done. Ideologies based on hate drive people to do insane, illogical, and immeasurably cruel things for little purpose other than a sick catharsis. Once the dust has settled, nobody wants to admit to being part of the problem. They'll blame it on some nebulous, hard-to-identify group that at one point in time seemed so large but now has miraculously vanished. Yet all of its members walk our streets, share our communities, and sometimes live in our homes. When the high-ranking Nazis were questioned at Nuremberg, every single one pleaded not guilty. Every single one. Many claimed complete ignorance of what had been going on in the concentration camps, despite that being a complete impossibility. Whether that was to escape prosecution or try and distance themselves from the horrors they'd caused, it didn't matter. All of their hateful pride disintegrated in the face of consequence. Reality makes cowards of the hateful. That's what Mandus is experiencing here. I believe him when he says he didn't want this to happen now, but he is the one who made it happen. And until very recently, he did everything in his power to make sure it did happen. He got swept up in an idea which seemed appealing, something that pandered to his newfound worldview. Pigs are now massacring innocents in the street, and Mandus is desperately trying to claim innocence himself. But he knew this would happen. They always know it will happen, and they wanted it to.
Do you hear me, Mandus? This is what you planned. This world is a machine for pigs, fit only for the slaughtering of pigs.
Interestingly, this reframes the game's name, because the way I see it now, there are 3 machines for pigs. The first is the abattoir, the machine that turns pigs to pork. A brutal but familiar machine. The second is the Mutilator, the machine that turns humans into pig-men hybrids, a violent and literally dehumanizing process unlike anything else. And the third machine is the world itself, at least as Mandus and the engineer viewed it. As much as I personally dislike pigs as creatures, those two fellows really look down on them and use them as analogues for a low value of human life. The first of these machines for pigs is practical, the third metaphorical, and the second a bridge between the two. I appreciate that both The Dark Descent and A Machine for Pigs as titles have masterful double meanings. Meanwhile, Rebirth doesn't quite get there, and The Bunker is a noun. Listen to the wording that the machine uses here.
Whores, beggars, orphans, filthy degenerates, pigs all. But I will purify the streets, cleanse this city, set the great industry free. I will clean the world, make it pure.
The idea of purity and degenerates is unfortunately not too far removed from how people still dehumanize others today. Those who use those terms to justify hatred somehow don't see that the goalposts for each term shift constantly. They don't see that they're being played. Like I've said before, cruelty is rarely built on logic. This section is not mechanically crazy, and it's actually quite short, but in terms of atmosphere and narrative, it's unbelievably strong. Following this, we reach the pig line, and if the name didn't give it away, it's fucking vile. Humans being held on hooks passing through industrial ovens, their bodies carved and baked as the machine sees fit. Remember those bed cages from the start of the game? Well, this is where people would end up after being lured into the comfort of Mandus's manor, drunk and full of what I'm sure they viewed to be pork. Then the cages would fall upon the beds, trapping them. After that, the entire bed is then tilted backwards into the wall by a powerful spring mechanism, feeding them into the machinery to be butchered or transformed. The beds are one more example of Wallace and Gromit style engineering, I suppose. As much as the game has a lot to say about the way powerful people treat commoners, it seems a little far-fetched that the rich and the powerful would ever go as far as to literally kidnap and eat us. That being said, I haven't checked the news in the past couple of months, so who knows. Now, as we approach the end of the game, you may be wondering, if Mandus hated humanity so much, and if the machine is effectively a manifestation of that, why is he now trying to stop it? And also, what gave him the amnesia to begin with? I believe these questions can be answered together. When his work was near complete, Mandus and the engineer were still united in ideology. But having the cruel mirror of the engineer held up to him allowed Mandus a grim privilege. He could see what he had become. He could view his acts without the distraction of participation. For the first time in months, he was no longer lost in his work. There's a concept in fiction called haunting the narrative. It's when a character who is either largely or entirely absent in the story has a deep, lasting effect on the events and characters, often going unspoken. Famous examples in video games would be the boss in most of Big Boss's Metal Gear games, and Big Boss himself in most of Solid Snake's Metal Gear games. Gwyn in the Dark Souls trilogy is another big one. And there's a character who haunts the narrative here too. Lily, Mandus's wife, the mother of Edwin and Enoch, and by the following accounts, the stronger half of the marriage. The first flashback you experience in the game tells you how she died. And the very last note in the game tells you what that did to Mandus. Memories. They surface like bloated bodies rising to the scum of the Thames. I looked at them, covered in the blood of their dead mother, little piglets squalling in their swaddling, and my heart was at once filled with a great love and a consuming hate I could never have imagined. At that point, did my soul split, creating him. Him, of course, being the engineer. Every action he took following his wife's death, all the cruelty, all the violence, all the rage, was because he didn't know what to do without her. At least that's how I read it. He speaks in this note about the engineer being a split part of his soul, but that didn't become literal until he built the machine, and even then, it's arguably still just him. The engineer isn't some haunting spirit or twisted familiar spawned by the orb. It's the side of him that didn't know how to cope. An early note from Mandus says, "Damn it. Damn this wretched soul. If only it were clockwork." He says that in regards to making the pigman, but it applies as strongly to himself. A man who knows machinery yearns to be able to control the heart, but no amount of WD-40 can fix that particular device. I mean, I'm sure someone's dad out there will disagree. When he saw those visions of the future, of the one thing he feared the most, his boys, the last echoes of his beloved wife dying, the consuming hate was all he had left. Can a man construct himself anew? Can a man, on realizing who he is, on what he has become, tear himself down to the bricks and begin again? Are our souls just this? Tiny cogwheels and clockwork, and intricate machines to serve a function that, upon reflection, we might set to a new task? Can a man, defined by his actions, defined by that which he now finds abhorrent, set to sabotaging this body, his machine, until those children of his soul turn in a new motion, and he may awake to a new sun, a new year, a new century, with hope in his heart? As I reach my hands to the exposed wires, I ask myself this: is redemption possible for a creature such as I? And if not, then surely better to die amongst my creations than to continue to live as a monster. Upon reflecting who he was, upon seeing the machine as others, his wife and sons likely included, would see him, Mandus decided to sabotage it in a desperate act of apology and self-flagellation, ironically causing the very issues we spent the first 2/3 of the game fixing. After this, he returned home, panicked, exhausted, overwhelmed, and traumatized by his own acts. His mind breaks, erasing the memories that pained him the most, which, if I remember correctly, is the second most reasonable cause of amnesia in the whole series. Trauma is much more likely than Daniel's potion, Tassie's alien goo, and whatever freaky shit Justine was up to. Henri got bombed, so that probably takes the crown as the best reason. The game's wiki and the game's writer's very own website mention a fever that caused Mandus's amnesia, contracted while he was in Mexico. But if he had a fever from February until December, and it only really nailed him at that late stage, that's astounding. I'm still placing most of the blame on the trauma. It now occurs to me that two of my favorite horror characters are meat processing plant architects that create frightening traps and kidnap people using pig henchmen to then torture them to fuel their very dubious misanthropic ideologies following some kind of trauma with their pregnant wife. We continue past the streets, past the pig line, and delve once more into the machine's depths, sabotaging and disrupting as we go, encountering the strangest of Mandus's inventions along the way. Several of the final moments of the game are difficult to parse, not in a bad way, but it's hard to tell if what we're seeing is actually happening. If it's Mandus's guilt manifesting as his environment, if it's the machine forming scenes to appeal to Mandus's old views, we don't know. All we do know is that Mandus pushes through. At the end of the game, we confront the machine for one final time. It pleads with us to reconsider as we go to shut it down. And I don't have the words to do this scene justice in any kind of summary, so I will let it speak for itself.
I have stood knee-deep in mud and bone and filled my lungs with mustard gas. I have seen 2 brothers fall. I have lain with holy wars and copulated with the autumnal fallout. I have dug trenches for the refugees. I have murdered dissidents where the ground never thaws and starved the masses into pain. A child's shadow burnt into the brickwork. A house of skulls in the jungle. The innocent Mandus trod and bled and gassed and starved and beaten and murdered and enslaved. This is your coming century. They will eat the Mandus. They will make pigs of you all, and they will bury their snouts into your ribs, and they will eat your hearts.
As we reach the top of the steps, we sit at a console which will disable the machine for good. As we press the button, mechanical arms dive into our chest, killing Mandus and the machine in one fell swoop. The actual logistics of how the machine dies are unclear and ultimately irrelevant. Whether it was a promise of mutually assured destruction, whether it was Mandus being plugged into the machine to take control, or if it was all some metaphor, we don't know, and we don't need to. Mandus and the machine were once one, and now they are again. Daniel and Henri's amnesia served to protect them from guilt and trauma, but Oswald's amnesia, ironically, served to make him remember who he was. He was not just the ambitious industrialist. He was not just the bitter architect. He was not just the violent zealot. He was a husband, a father, and beneath all of that, simply a man. His hatred and power made him lose sight of that. He only remembered what was important when he forgot what wasn't. And that's the man you see at the end of the game. Confronted with his own horrible acts, ranted at by the embodiment of his blinding fury, and burdened with the knowledge of the horrors to come, his final act is choosing peace. He's not a hero. He can't undo what he did. I haven't even listed all of the horrors he is responsible for. He used children as slaves to clean the reconstituted fat from the pipes of his machines, who themselves would then be boiled by steam or fed to the pigs. You can't be redeemed from that. But he could stop it from getting worse. He had nothing left to fight for. When he finally, painfully came to his senses, he chose hope. Not for himself, but a hope that humanity would endure, improve, and one day look forward to a future that wasn't guided by men like him. The events that the engineer alluded to all came to pass. I have stood knee-deep in mud and bone and filled my lungs with mustard gas. The First World War. I have lain with holy wars, the seemingly endless conflicts in the Middle East, ongoing still to this very day. I have murdered dissidents where the ground never thaws, the Soviet political purges under Stalin. Starved the masses into faith. China under Mao's rule. A child shadow burnt into the brickwork. The infamous shadows of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. A house of skulls in the jungle. This could apply to so many conflicts. The Vietnam War, Pol Pot's rule of Cambodia, and any number of uprisings, coups, and proxy wars fought across Africa and South or Central America. The innocent trod and bled and gassed and starved and beaten and murdered and enslaved. The Holocaust, among many, many others. The 20th century was a dark time, and it makes me wonder what Mandus would have seen had his visions been of the 21st century. But despite all of those horrors, we persist. I wonder if Mandus saw that too. An unspoken tragedy in the story is that of Mandus's lost potential. We can see what he was able to construct for the most vile of purposes. It was a disgusting technological marvel. Yes, he had help from the remains of Brennenburg, and much of his machinery was powered by something akin to vitae, the torture extract that Alexander had utilized, but even with that effectively magical fuel, what he managed to create was unbelievable. Hell, the machine even hints at forming a nuclear bomb.
Hear me, Mandus. My gears are adjust. My steam is built. Soon I will spill that blue water and split the egg, the atom, my soul, and there will be a very great burning that we might make the world clean.
Granted, he and the machine had some help with that. They foresaw the nuclear attacks on Japan, so they knew what to aim for. But he still effectively outpaced the Manhattan Project by 45 years, effectively alone. And the scale and speed of his operation was insane. Alexander of Brennenburg, the supernatural, immortal alien scientist with his own castle, land, political power, and many, many assistants, took centuries of work to be able to almost achieve his comparatively small goal of opening a portal home. Mandus outdid him entirely, creating an army, outsmarting and outmaneuvering everyone who would try to stop him, and fully mechanizing the end of the world in just 9 or 10 months. Plus, he seemingly accidentally invented electric pigmen that could teleport freely, something that Alexander could only dream of, and that was just a side gig. Think of the good Mandus could have done. I can't even begin to list the inventions he could have achieved earlier than humanity ever actually did. Edwin and Enoch could have been playing with Tamagotchis for fuck's sake. Now, a lot of what I've spoken about in regards to the story is speculation or a personal interpretation of the game's events. But that's really the best we have. The game's wiki is very funny because there are huge sections littered with the citation needed and speculation tags for this very reason. But having that room for interpretation while still maintaining such a strong atmosphere and narrative is testament to the quality of the game. And that shouldn't be surprising if you're familiar with the developers, the Chinese Room, who have also delighted us with games like Still Wakes the Deep, Dan Pinchbeck, the lead writer and one of the founders of the Chinese Room alongside Jessica Curry, who did the music for this game, which is astounding, is among my favorite writers now. I'm glad Still Wakes the Deep got so many awards. It was very well deserved. Yes, A Machine for Pigs would have been better had it included more aspects of the Dark Descent. Hell, if it had those, it would probably be my favorite horror game of all time by quite some margin. But Lost Potential doesn't define it for me. The incredibly poignant and troubling tale of Oswald Mandis does. People will still say they don't like the game due to the frankly ravaged core gameplay, and that's fine. But I've found in the past that whenever there's a conversation about narrative-focused games, especially those that could be considered walking simulators or something adjacent, people begin behaving very strangely. There's suddenly a huge amount of arbitrary gatekeeping, or attempts to recategorize these games as lesser than the things they like, using pseudo-analytical arguments that do nothing other than prove a kind of stubbornness. And I don't know why people do that. You're allowed to not like things. You don't need to be right, and other people don't need to be wrong for your opinion to hold up. If you're wondering why I'm saying all of this, it's partly me venting at my old self for being a twat, and partly because I'd be amazed if there aren't comments under this video that fall exactly into this category that were left by very angry people who just watched the first minute of the video before needing to justify an opinion that few people will ever see, let alone care about. Anyway, the story, while being the main strength of the game, is not the only one. Like I said, the music is incredible. Jessica Curry's work, especially the theme for Mandis, is ethereal. And the voice acting in the game, my god, both Mandis and the engineer put in generational efforts. I love the delivery of almost every line.
What are you doing, little piggy? Do you think I will allow you to sabotage me again?
I want my children, you unholy bastard!
I know the cliche about good male acting is just screaming, but the delivery here is spectacular, and Mandis has so many more chill deliveries, like with the ending monologue. Toby Longworth, the voice of Mandis, has been in a number of roles over the years, most notably Senator Lot Dodd from Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace.
This is outrageous! I object!
Mark Roper, the voice of the engineer, is an actor who has appeared as minor characters in a huge number of shows and movies. I know him best from The In-Betweeners. In fact, this interaction he's in is a pretty good summary of he and Mandis' relationship at the end of the game.
Now, sir.
Come out here, you coward!
I think we should all take a breath, try and calm down.
You telling me to calm down? Calm down? I'll smash the shit out of your garden and see how you like it!
Okay, I've got a really bad hangover, so if you aren't willing to have a sensible conversation, I'm just going to shut the curtains.
Another unexpected boon that this game has is that it answers one of the most frequent questions I've received since making videos or streaming. A lot of people ask me, where do I start with horror games? I'm easily scared, or I'm new to the medium, and I love the idea of the games, but I'm intimidated. Amnesia, A Machine for Pigs, is perfect for that. It's mostly atmosphere and narrative with some very straightforward enemy encounters. And despite not calling it scary in my original review, it definitely has some excellent scares. There are some quite subtle ones, like this one when you're on your way to leave Mandis' mansion. You walk out of a room, hearing a subtle disturbance from behind a door, and if you interact with it... Now, that's nothing extreme, but it's a textbook startle for those with the curiosity to find it. And I like those. There's also this one where you open a drawer and Mandis starts lifting off the ground in shock like a Looney Tunes character. But genuinely, this game is ideal for people new to horror games. It's straightforward, effective, and it eases you into the genre well. Plus, from this you can easily graduate to something like The Dark Descent or SOMA with incredibly familiar gameplay. On the topic of horror, a lot of people would call this game Lovecraftian, and I understand why. The Dark Descent was quite cosmic horror-y in many respects, and certain motifs like the enigmatic orbs certainly play a role in that, but I would really label this game as gothic horror, in one of its purest forms, which a lot of things that are called Lovecraftian or cosmic are better described as. Themes of guilt, hubris, the abuse of power, man and machine, science and faith. Remember the time when most gothic horror was being written. It wasn't a great time. There was rampant inequality, rapid and harsh industrialization, scientific progress, and scientific brutality. All of these things are reflected in the game. It says a lot more about human nature than it does about cosmic insignificance or anything of that ilk. The game even opens with this quote, He who makes a beast of himself removes himself from the pain of being human. That is both wonderfully applicable to the story of the game, but also a core motif of certain Gothic horror tales. The Gothic horror story that applies best to this game, other than Frankenstein for obvious reasons, is the strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, a source that many prominent Gothic horror games take notes from. Unrelated, but check out this sound effect from the game's intro. That story is a tale of two men, an incredibly intelligent scientist on the cutting edge of human knowledge, and a violent brute that represents the bestial nature of man. And, spoilers, they're the same guy. I'd elaborate more on this, but in an upcoming video I'll be speaking a lot more about this story, so I'll spare you for now. Do any of you remember this video?
I'm just coming through the old first, might be a body in there. What a tramp with no teeth. East what, subway? East wing. You get in.
To summarize everything I've said so far, which was originally going to only be a 10 to 20 minute criticism of my own youthful stupidity, but has since turned into a 100,000 subscriber special of sorts, and thanks for that, folks. Amnesia, A Machine for Pigs is a game with many faults, but all of these things don't really matter to me. Despite the lost potential that the game has, I love it. The story is poignant, the characters are fascinating, the themes are outstanding, and the performances of Mandus and the engineer are generational. I think and fear that no matter when you watch this video or play this game, the story of Oswald Mandus will be relevant. While he, in his final moments, chose hope, wishing for a future without men like him, we're not there yet. Mary was not the only Shelley to inspire this game with Frankenstein. Percy Shelley chipped in too. There are legions of those in power and below who would see themselves become akin to Oswald Mandus's namesake. I met a traveller from an antique land who said two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them, on the sand, half sunk a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read, which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. And on the pedestal these words appear: My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away.
I lay there and watched the god I had created die. At the end, when we were cold as the stone we had hewn his body from, when the lights were nearly all extinguished, we heard, in the silent distance, the man-pigs singing to one another. Then, as the last lights were gone, and we lay together in the deep, they drifted away, and all was silent. Such a silence I have never known. And as the dust settled on my open eyes, and we lay together embraced forever, I heard, miles above us, the sounds of the city turning over in its sleep. A church bell ringing out, and in that moment, the new century was born.